Okay. Chapter 5. Doc amongst the sparks. They blinked. None of them at the same time. None of them at the same frequency. But they blinked. They blinked, and it made Doc smile. It wasn't a joyful smile. Mirthless. A hollow victory. Pyrrhic. Humans would call it Pyrrhic. Doc didn't know that yet, but he would in a few months. Doc didn't know what a human was yet. Yet. You could have taken them prisoner. Doc was standing in front of a wall of shelves. It was filled with glass boxes, each one with a processor and a spark chamber. Each one was a Cybertronian, one of the greatest species in the history of the galaxy. Well, the brain and the soul of a Cybertronian. All they needed were bodies. These were the fallen. Not all the fallen, just the ones that Secundus' crew had rescued during the last decades of the war. The ones that Doc couldn't save. Offline is what most called them. Not dead. Fleshlings died. Cybertronians went offline, and one day Doc would bring them all back online. How would I have gotten them back to base, boss? I've got a tiny little chassis now. Doc knew Grinder was still bitter. Grinder used to be a Class 3, a large Cybertronian standing over 40 feet high, a war hero. He went offline sacrificing himself to save dozens of other bots from the Decepticons. It took him a while, but Doc had been able to bring him back online. But as a Class 1, a tiny bot, barely 15 feet high. On the other hand, he was over twice as tall as Doc. Still, Grinder was the lucky one. There were over 1,000 bots lying on the shelves in front of them, who had swapped places with Grinder in a sparkbeat. He should know better. Sorry, Doc. I do appreciate not being on a shelf. Doc smiled, almost laughed. Grinder did know better. After a moment, Grinder spoke again. Look, we left their chassis out there. Grunt and I can go pick them up. If you can get them functioning again, maybe we can get a few more of these guys back online. Doc considered it. Not a bad plan, but then Grinder was always a decent tactician. Not a great tactician, more of a fighter, but not a bad one. Wait, Doc asked, what do you mean, if I can get their chassis functioning? What did you do to them? Grinder had the good sense to look a bit sheepish. Well, I made sure they were no longer functional. Doc waited, but there was nothing forthcoming. And how did you do that? With my fusion cannon, at point-blank range, with extreme prejudice. Grinder was grinning ear to ear. Doc hung his head. There's so few of us left, Grinder. Yeah, and now there's 3 less Decepticons. Decepticons that were lighting up Grunt, by the way. Grunt was fine. Doc had never seen a stronger Cybertronian. If the Quintessons attacked us now... Doc let the idea hang in the air. Come on, Doc. I thought you were smart. There's nothing left on Cybertron that would be worth anyone coming here to take. The war's over. That's why we're trying to get the shuttle running. Last one off the planet, shut off the lights. That wasn't entirely true. Most of the species was still alive. They existed in the sparks and processors of the fallen, stored in warehouses far larger than this wall of shelves. Even the Viacons had enough good sense not to destroy those mausoleums. Doc could rebuild this world, rebuild his people, if the fighting would just stop. It seemed that there were only Viacons left. Megatron had created them by the thousands, raw protoforms with processors pre-programmed to fight the Autobots, to ravage and destroy, utterly obedient to Megatron from the moment they were brought online. They weren't full-fledged Cybertronians. They were children, born to fight, born to kill, and able to do so from the moment they began to function. Anathema. How could Megatron do that? He was insane, irrational, utterly irrational, not only to create an army of infants, but to condemn those he brought to life, to death on a battlefield. These were his children, spark of his spark, energon of his energon. But unlike the rest of the species, Viacons were not lovingly crafted by parents who wanted to raise and love their children. No, they were built on an assembly line. Automatons. like how the fleshlings viewed machines. Even now, centuries later, most Viacons had never given much thought to the greater things in life: purpose, meaning, philosophy, love. Not romantic reproduction that the fleshlings wasted so much time on, but what it meant to truly love another sentient being, to be willing to help them for nothing in return. That was love. All the Viacons saw was an opportunity to destroy. Megatron was insane. It was the only logical explanation. And he was gone now. He'd left the planet, chasing after Optimus Prime to kill his archenemy. Neither had ever been heard from again. Doc doubted either would ever come back. And now Secundus, his good friend, his trusted leader, his brother in arms, wanted to leave Cybertron as well. But this wasn't a mission to protect the planet like Optimus had left on, nor was it a mission of vengeance like Megatron had chased after. No, this was about survival and the chance to rebuild. Flee to another world, somewhere beyond the former Autobot Empire. None of those worlds would take them in. No. Somewhere farther out, where they were unknown. Somewhere the Decepticons would never find them. Peace. If such a thing could exist. Doc knew of such a world. Jetfire had found it long ago, long before the war. Doc had heard of it only once, but he memorized the coordinates. It existed in the darkness between the spiral arms of the Milky Way galaxy, so far away from other stars that the side of the planet that faced away from its sun was shrouded in darkness instead of being lit up by starlight. But on this little verdant world were fleshlings. Fleshlings that had never heard of Cybertron or Quintessons or any of the mess the Autobots had made of paradise. The few Decepticons left in the galaxy had certainly never heard of this solar system hidden in the vastness of space between the galaxy's spiral arms. Their little crew could hide there. There were resources there. They could mine the ore they needed or trade for it with the fleshlings. They could relearn the secrets of Energon, how to bring a protoform to life, how to fill it with Energon and make new family, new friends. Without a Vector Sigma, or with one, if Doc could figure out how to build one. Doc looked up at the wall of processors and spark chambers. Time enough to build an alt form for each one of these fallen. Build back his old family, his old friends. Doc's shoulders dropped a bit. They were deactivated. They were offline. But they were not dead. And Doc would see them brought back to life again. Them and a million more new Transformers, and they would come back to Cybertron with ships full of Energon and reignite the spark of this world. Don't bother, Grinder, Doc said, answering the question asked less than a second ago. If those Decepticon forms are as damaged as you usually leave them, then I won't have time to get them functional again. And we won't have room to fit them on the shuttle. Not if we're taking as many of the offline with us as we can. Speaking of, I need to start deconstructing the quadranium Grunt brought back. Blah. I'm going to do that sentence over again. Sorry, guys. Speaking of, I need to start deconstructing the quadranium Grunt brought us back. Start forging it into useful parts for the shuttle. Well, Grinder paused. If you're sure, Doc. Doc nodded and put a gentle hand on Grinder's upper arm. I'm sure, my friend. In fact, I have an idea for a mission. One last glorious mission before we leave our world behind. Let's correct that typo. He turned, leading the much larger Autobot out of the storeroom turned mausoleum. I think you should talk to Secundus about this and start planning. We can fit more of the offline on the shuttle than we have in storage, but how do we get to other storage facilities without alerting the Decepticons? Grinder nodded. That's a good idea. We'd have to do some scouting, maybe even run some diversionary tactics. I bet we could set a trap and burn a few of those Seekers down. Doc nodded, holding back his sigh. He didn't want to see any other Cybertronians offline, not even Viacons. But Grinder already knew that, and it wouldn't help anything to express the sentiment again. He hit the light switch and closed the door behind him, checking the handle to make sure it had locked. Behind the door, the single LED on each processor blinked. None at the same time. None at the same frequency. But they blinked. They weren't quite alive. They weren't quite dead. Doc smiled, his mirthless smile.